The roaring wind tore through the rigging as the ship battled towering waves beneath a stormy sky. Sailors clung to the cold, slippery decks, their faces etched with fear and determination. In this relentless chaos, these brave men faced nature's fury with nothing but their skill and iron tools, fighting to stay afloat against the vast, unforgiving ocean. Every creak of the hull, every gust of wind, reminded them of their fragile humanity amid the colossal power of sea and sky. These explorers and sailors relied on tools forged from the hardest iron, lifelines in a world where one mistake meant death. Their courage, struggle, and ingenuity shaped history's great voyages into the New World and beyond. If you're fascinated by the human stories behind these epic journeys, subscribe and help us reach 3,000 followers. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and let us know. You're connected with a quick emoji. You ever step outside on a freezing morning and feel that icy blast cut right through you? Now imagine being at sea, where the cold isn't just a momentary chill, but a constant, biting presence. The salty sea spray stings your face. The wind howls through the rigging, and the wooden deck beneath your feet is always damp and slippery. That's the world sailors faced during the age of exploration, a time when the unknown ocean was both a pathway to discovery and a brutal test of human endurance. Today, we're going to dive into the gritty reality of colonial maritime life during the 15th to 18th centuries. We're talking about the tools that saved lives, the construction techniques that kept ships afloat, and the human stories of survival and suffering that defined this era. If you love history, especially the human side of epic journeys, stick around. And hey, if you like learning about these daring adventures, already leave that thumbs up. Imagine what it was like aboard a typical carrack or galleon, massive wooden ships built from 2,000 trees, crafted by skilled carpenters who knew the ocean's wrath. They used oak and pine, chosen for strength and flexibility. The process was grueling. Large planks shaped and fitted together with iron bolts, then sealed with natural resins and tar to keep out the endless water. The hulls had to withstand storms, sun, and rot, so maintenance was constant. Life on deck was a tough hierarchy. At the top, the captain and ship's officers made life or death decisions. Below them, the master in charge of navigation and ship repairs, the quartermasters, then the sailors, who handled the sails, rigging, and lookout duty. Every day, the crew's routine was relentless, raising and reefing sails, repairing torn canvas, or scrubbing the deck with salt water to prevent rot. Conditions were extreme: freezing nights, scorching days, and the ever-present threat of storms. The ocean didn't discriminate between rich and poor sailors. It was a ruthless equalizer. About 20% of sailors never made it. Home lost to storms, disease, or shipwrecks. Disease, like scurvy, was deadly and insidious. Without fresh produce, sailors suffered from vitamin C deficiency, causing gums to bleed and wounds to fester. To survive, crews relied on rudimentary tools like iron knives, fishhooks, and makeshift medical instruments, all vital for survival. Navigation was another challenge. Without GPS or modern instruments, sailors used basic tools like the compass, astrolabe, and cross staff. The compass, a magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water, pointed north and was a sailor's best guide. The astrolabe measured the angle of the sun or stars, helping determine latitude. These devices were rudimentary but groundbreaking, allowing mariners to chart courses across vast, uncharted waters. But tools alone weren't enough. The crew's resilience was tested daily. The cold was relentless, ice cold. Winds cutting through layers of clothing, the salty spray numbing fingers, and the constant threat of frostbite or hypothermia. Food was scarce and often spoiled. Salted meat and hardtack became staples, but they made sailors sick from mold and salt fatigue. Water was scarce too, and often contaminated, leading to dehydration and illness. Naufrages and shipwrecks were common. The ocean didn't forgive mistakes. Storms could tear ships apart in minutes, leaving crews stranded on deserted islands or sinking into the icy depths. When a ship went down, it was survival of the fittest. Some managed to cling to wreckage for hours, fighting off hypothermia and sharks, waiting for rescue that might never come. Despite all this suffering, there was a human drive, an unstoppable urge to discover new lands, to expand empires, and to survive. Many sailors faced the brutal cold, hunger, and fear with remarkable resilience. They relied on iron tools like cutlasses, knives, and shovels that could cut through wood or serve as makeshift weapons. These tools were life-saving, allowing them to repair, hunt, and defend themselves. So, the tools of iron weren't just hardware, they were lifelines. They helped build the ships that carried entire civilizations across oceans, and they were the instruments of survival amid the chaos of the sea. Without them, exploration might have remained a dream, forever lost in the icy waves and treacherous storms. Now, imagine yourself in that world, chained to the mast during a storm, feeling the cold wind stinging your cheeks, clutching your only knife for protection, the ship creaking and groaning under the strain. That was the harsh reality for countless sailors during the age of exploration. Their stories are of suffering, yes, but also of incredible human grit. So next time you think about the Age of Discovery, remember, it wasn't just brave explorers and shiny new maps. It was about raw human suffering, survival, and the iron tools that kept hope alive amid the icy, salty chaos of the ocean. Can you imagine how it feels to be trapped on a wooden prison, hammered by salt spray, the wind slicing through your clothes like 1,000 tiny knives, your skin raw from the sun and the salt, your hands rough and calloused, gripping the rail as the ship heaves wildly beneath you? The air is thick with the smell of brine, burnt wood, and the sweat of your fellow sailors. Every creak of the hull sounds like the groan of a suffering beast, and the cold, it's relentless, gnawing at your bones, numbing your face. The sea is alive, cruel and unyielding. Today, we're going to dive deep into that world, the human saga behind the great age of exploration. We're going to reveal how sailors survived the unimaginable, how they fought not just the vast ocean, but their own bodies and minds. And trust me, what you're about to hear will blow your mind. If you love stories of adventure, resilience, and sacrifice, hit that like button now. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because this is just the beginning. Picture the era of the great navigations, from the late 1400s through the 1700s, the age of discovery. Brave captains, daring crews, ships like the Santa Maria and the HMS Victory. These vessels, made of up to 2,000 trees, were floating marvels of engineering. But they were also fragile prisons, barely held together by nails and tar. The crews, often just a few dozen men, packed like sardines, fighting hunger, sickness, and despair. Mortality rates? Roughly 20%, sometimes higher. That means every voyage was a game of chance, life hanging by a thread. Now imagine yourself in a tiny, crowded deck, the air thick with sweat and rot. The ship pitches violently in storms. Water crashes over the sides, drenching you. You hear the scream of wind, the creak of strained wood, and the relentless slap of waves. You're seasick. Your stomach rebel. You vomit overboard, tasting salt and bile. Your gums bleed from scurvy. Your teeth loosen and fall out. You feel the cold, abrupt, biting, never-ending. In that moment, survival isn't just about steering clear of storms or pirates. It's about enduring conditions that could destroy you physically and psychologically. But it wasn't just natural forces that threatened these sailors. No, it was the constant fight for survival that tested their limits. Imagine the tools they relied on, primitive yet life-saving. Iron nails and hooks, crude surgical instruments and makeshift medicines. They lacked antibiotics, of course. Instead, they used vinegar, alcohol, and herbal infusions. Sometimes a captain's desperation led to amputations, done without anesthesia, with a saw and a knife, while the patient bled out in agony. The hardships weren't just physical, they tore into the soul. Think about those long, endless days at sea, staring at horizonless water with no land in sight. The monotony, the fear of death, the isolation from loved ones. Crew members went mad, some hanged themselves, others simply gave up. Yet what kept them? What kept going? A fierce will to survive, the hope that land was near, or the promise of gold and glory back home. Let's talk about the real tools that made a difference. Iron was king. Sharp nails kept the ship afloat, but also caused injuries. The sailors' ingenuity was incredible. They fashioned makeshift splints from wood and cloth, fashioned tourniquets from strips of sailcloth, and used hot irons to cauterize wounds. Imagine the pain. Hot metal pressed against flesh, the smell of burnt skin mixing with salt and sweat. It sounds brutal, but it was often their only chance, and still the hazards kept. The piling up. Infections ran rampant. Imagine a cut, small at first, turning into a festering wound. Without antibiotics, they relied on a mixture of vinegar and alcohol to clean it. Crude but effective. Many wounds, however, festered into deadly gangrene. Eels, rats, and even larvae could be found in the stores, turning the ship into a floating nightmare. Sometimes the crew would find themselves face to face with larva-infested food or mold spoiling the biscuit supplies, then a new wave of sickness. And speaking of sickness, the scourge of scurvy was the silent killer. It caused gums to bleed, teeth to fall out, limbs to swell. Imagine the pain, the helplessness. The sailors, desperate, chewed on citrus fruits when they could get them. Otherwise, they resorted to bitter remedies. The discovery of vitamin C was a game changer, but it often came too late. For many, it meant a slow, painful decline, muscle weakness, anemia, death. During these voyages, survival also meant mastering the art of resourcefulness. They rationed water carefully. Sometimes to stretch supplies, they'd use seawater, which made dehydration worse. They drank distilled rainwater if lucky, but dehydration was a constant threat. Food was scarce. Dried meat, hardtack, moldy biscuits. The smell alone could make you gag. Imagine chewing that tough, salty bread, each bite cracking your teeth while your gums bleed and your stomach rumbles with hunger. But the sailors weren't just passive victims. They fought, back with what they had, improvising bandages from old sailcloth, making seawater desalination devices from clay and metal, and even using the ship's bilge water, filthy, salty, but sometimes enough to delay death. They had to be creative, resilient, and unbreakable. Every day was a struggle. The relentless physical pain, the psychological torment. When the wind howled or the ship lurched, you could almost hear the silent screams of those who didn't make it, but those who survived. They carried scars inside and out. Their bodies, battered and scarred, told stories of resilience. Their minds, hardened by suffering, knew that survival was a matter of grit and ingenuity. If you want to know exactly how these tools and strategies kept them alive, there's a whole video about the 14 essential iron tools that saved lives during the colonial age. Trust me, it's a game changer. The truth is, these voyages weren't just about discovering new lands. They were a test of human endurance. The sailors' stories, their injuries, their little victories over despair, these are the real heroes. They endured, they fought, and they changed the world, often at the cost of their own bodies and minds. And that's where we can truly appreciate how far we've come today. Modern ships, medical care, global communication, things these sailors could only dream of. Yet, their spirit of survival? It still lives within us. Next time you look at a ship or hear the ocean, remember, someone once faced that cruel, icy wind and fought to see tomorrow. That's the real legacy of the age of exploration. If you're curious about the specific iron tools that made all the difference, check out the next part. But for now, just imagine the courage it took to face that endless, deadly sea. Because in the end, it wasn't just about ships and maps. It's about human resilience in its rawest form. Imagine yourself on a ship during the age of exploration. The horizon is endless, and the salty, salt air hits your face like a slap. The deck beneath your feet is creaking. Splinters of wood, sharp and dangerous. Every day is a battle, not just with the sea, but with your body and mind. The voyage is a test of human resilience that can make or break a person. Now, think about the struggles sailors faced, problems that today seem almost solvable. But back then, they threatened survival every single day. These sailors didn't have fancy tech, medical miracles, or global communication. They had iron tools, resourcefulness, and an unbreakable will. Let's dive into some of the biggest problems they faced, problems that only iron tools and clever techniques could fix. First, imagine the nightmare of a cracked hull. The ship's sturdiness was its life. If a splintered plank or a rogue cannonball caused a breach, water would flood in fast, like a fist punching through a paper wall. Without modern patching kits or steel reinforcements, they relied on good old iron nails and cumbersome oakum caulking fibers, soaked with tar, to seal the gaps. But tar alone wasn't enough when the hull was ripped open. That's when they used a technique called fire and water sealing. Sailors would heat iron wedges over open flame until red hot, then jam them into the cracks to expand and block the leak. It was brutal, but effective. The heat would sometimes cause the wood to crack further, risking even more damage. Still, it was a race against time, with every minute counting. But it wasn't just hull breaches. The ship's mast could snap like a twig in a storm. Imagine the chaos when a gust tore through the sails and suddenly the mast was teetering, ready to crash. No modern cranes or rescue teams, just a crew with axes, saws, and iron hooks. They would attach iron shrouds, thick cables, and use pulleys to stabilize what was left, then hurriedly replace broken parts with spares they carried in the ship's hold. Sometimes they'd even cut down a nearby tree using their axes and saws to make new mast sections. These tools, massive, rusted, but vital, were the backbone of survival. And they had to work fast, often in the middle of a storm, with water pouring over the deck. Now, let's face the reality of injury. Imagine a sailor with a deep cut on his hand, the blood flowing freely, his fingers trembling from shock. No sterile hospital, no quick stitches, just a rag, some alcohol, and an iron needle. Yes, a real iron needle, heated until red hot to sterilize it, then used to sew up wounds. The pain was excruciating, and infections were common. They knew that if bacteria got in, it could be fatal. So sailors had to improvise, using whatever they had, oil, tar, or even plant extracts, to prevent infection. Sometimes they'd pack wounds with cloth soaked in salt water, which stung like hell but helped keep bacteria at bay. Yet despite all that, infection and gangrene claimed many lives. The key was timing. If you could survive the initial trauma and keep the wound clean, hope persisted. But the problems didn't stop there. Imagine the fear of a sailor suffering from scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. The crew's diet was monotonous: hardtack, dried meat, and salt pork. Fresh fruit? Forget it. Scurvy would sap strength, cause gums to bleed and teeth to fall out. The grim irony: sailors knew citrus helped, but they rarely had it on board. To combat this, some ships carried dried lime or lemon juice, an early form of vitamin C supplement. Others relied on fermented foods rich in vitamin C like sauerkraut, which was surprisingly effective. But often, it was a game of chance. Scurvy was deadly, and no iron tool could fix a deficiency. It was a slow, torturous decline. People trembling, gums bleeding, bodies wasting away. Imagine the despair, watching your shipmate turn ghostly pale or fall silent forever. And what about the worst enemy of all? Disease spreading like wildfire in the cramped, damp decks. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera. They all thrived in the filth. The sailors' only hope was sanitation and hygiene, luxuries few ships could afford. Yet some captains improvised with iron tools, shovels, buckets, scrapers, to clean the decks and remove waste. They'd burn tar or spruce resin to mask the smells, but sometimes it was too late. The crew would fall ill one after the other, trembling with fever, vomiting, and dehydration. Without antibiotics, many would die, sometimes just yards from safety. The mental toll was immense. Watching friends fade away, knowing there was little you could do but pray and endure. But not all problems were physical. Imagine the psychological torment, the endless silence of the ocean, the stormy nights, the uncertainty. Some sailors turned to faith or superstition to survive. Others, driven to despair, contemplated mutiny or jump overboard. The captain's iron tools, like knives and axes, were sometimes used not just for repairs but to enforce discipline, sharpening blades, intimidating, maintaining order. It was a brutal, often lonely existence. Yet, amid all this chaos, sailors relied on their ingenuity, their iron tools, their resourcefulness, their resolve. Now think about the contrast with today. Modern ships have composite hulls, automated patching systems, antibiotics, and advanced sanitation. We're protected from so many dangers. But back then, every ship was a floating, fragile prison. Every problem was a threat to life, and every fix was a battle. Those iron tools, massive, rusty, indispensable, were their lifelines. They could fix a hull, cut down a mast, sew up a wound, or clean a deck. They were the difference between sinking or surviving. And here's the kicker. These tools weren't just metal. They represented hope, resilience, human ingenuity. They turned chaos into order. They kept people alive in the face of relentless threats. Think about that next time you see a ship or hear the ocean whisper. Someone, centuries ago, faced the cruelest storms, the worst injuries, and the deadliest diseases. They fought tooth and nail, sometimes with blood on their hands, sometimes with sweat and tears, just to see another dawn. If you want to dive deeper into the specific iron tools that made all this possible, the knives, saws, nails, and wedges, there's a whole video about the 14 essential iron tools that saved lives during the colonial age. Trust me, it's a game changer. But for now, just imagine the courage it took to face that endless, deadly sea, armed with only iron, sweat, and a fierce will to survive. Because in the end, it wasn't just about ships or maps. It was about human resilience on the brink of destruction, and how those tiny, unassuming iron tools became lifelines in the chaos of the great ocean. Imagine yourself standing at the bow of a ship in the late 1600s. The salty air hits your face like a slap, sharp, cold, and biting. The horizon stretches endlessly, a vast canvas painted with storms and calm alike. You're miles from land, sailing into the unknown, and every move you make could be your last. It sounds romantic, right? But behind that romance is a brutal reality, a reality shaped by iron, sweat, and relentless human grit. Back then, life on a colonial ship was a constant battle, not just against the fierce storms or the treacherous currents, but against time, disease, injury, and despair. It was a prison afloat, fragile and unforgiving, and the tools that kept these ships afloat, these tiny iron champions, weren't just metal. They were lifelines, symbols of resilience carved into cold steel. Some tools could mean the difference between survival and sinking into the depths. Now picture the crew, ordinary sailors, farm boys, laborers, prisoners, thrust into an environment far beyond what most could imagine. Their days, grueling. Their nights, filled with the creak of wood and the distant howl of the wind. They faced injuries that would make even today's paramedics grimace. Gaping wounds from splinters, broken bones from a sudden jolt, or worse, a mast crashing down on someone. The pain was real, terrifying, visceral. You could hear the screams, smell blood mixing with the sea's brine. And yet, these sailors weren't helpless. They relied on iron tools, those simple, heavy, rusted objects, to fight their chaos. A knife for slicing through sails torn in a storm, a wedge to pry open a cracked hull, a saw to cut away damaged wood, nails hammered in with relentless force, wedges pounded into broken planks. Each iron piece was a tiny miracle, crafted for survival. Let's zoom in on one typical disaster. A sailor's arm gets caught in a splintered piece of wood during a storm. The pain? Excruciating. Blood spurts. The wound becomes a festering mess in the salty air. Without antibiotics, infection is just waiting to set in. The crew's medic, the ship's carpenter, grasps his iron scalpel, a simple yet deadly effective tool. With trembling hands, he cuts away the torn flesh, stops the bleeding with a heated iron rod, or maybe even a makeshift tourniquet. Every move, a matter of life or death, or imagine a crack in, the hull. The ship's integrity is slipping away, time's ticking, water seeping in. The crew scrambles, frantic. They use wedges, hammered into the crack, to stabilize the hull temporarily. Maybe they even fashion a patch from scrap wood, sealing it with pitch and iron nails. During storms, those patches might hold just enough to keep the ship afloat, just enough to survive until they reach port. But it wasn't just injuries or leaks. Disease was a relentless killer. The cramped, damp quarters fostered infections, scurvy and dysentery. Sailors' gums bled, their teeth rotted and fell out. A sailor's cough could turn into pneumonia in a matter of hours, and when someone fell ill, it was a race against time. They'd try to sterilize wounds with vinegar or salt, crude but better than nothing. Iron tools were sterilized as best as possible, heated in fires or scrapped with abrasive stones. The crew knew these tools could also transfer deadly pathogens if not handled right, but the hardest challenge was mental. Imagine the psychological toll. Gangs of sailors, exhausted and battered, fighting despair. The endless smell of salt, sweat and rotting wood burned into their memories. Some faced hallucinations, Others collapsed in silent tears. The ship's iron tools weren't just physical aids, they were symbols of hope. Each fixing, each repair was a small act of defiance against chaos. Now, think about the transformation these sailors underwent. Their bodies hardened, muscles like steel, skin rough and scarred. Their minds, sharpened by constant hardship. They learned patience, resilience, ingenuity. They became experts at improvising with what they had, using scrap iron, broken tools, even parts of the ship itself to patch up problems. Every scratch, every bruise told a story of survival. And here's the kicker. These stories are the backbone of history. Ordinary men facing extraordinary circumstances. Their sacrifices, their suffering, often go unnoticed. But their legacy is written in those rusted tools, in the scars they carried in the ships that crossed oceans. With blood, sweat, and iron, today we benefit from that brutal, relentless human effort. Modern ships, they're made of composites, with automated systems, antibiotics, and sanitation that would blow the minds of those sailors. We can forget the cold, the salt, the constant danger. Our safety seems automatic, but imagine how it felt every day a battle. Those sailors, they faced death with a grim determination. Their tools weren't just metal, they were symbols of their will to live. So, next time you see a ship or hear the oceans whisper, think about those anonymous heroes of the sea, the ones who, armed with nothing but iron, human ingenuity, and sheer guts, kept hope alive amid chaos. Their journey, their sacrifice, teaches us that resilience isn't just about strength. It's about the unbreakable spirit that turns chaos into survival. If you want to see exactly how these iron tools looked, how they worked, and the stories behind each one, I've got a video here on the 14 essential iron tools that saved lives during the colonial age. Trust me, understanding these tools is like peering into the very soul of maritime resilience. But for now, just imagine facing the endless, deadly sea, armed with only iron, sweat, and a fierce will to survive. Because that's what it took to be a sailor back then. And that's the real voyage. Human resilience, courage carved into rusted steel, forging hope in the heart of chaos. The sailors of old didn't just sail across oceans, they crossed the edge of death itself. And in doing so, they left us a legacy of endurance that still echoes in every wave today. So, if you appreciate their story, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next chapter of maritime history. Because their courage isn't just history, it's a beacon for us all, reminding us that even in chaos, human spirit can endure.